A single mom finds an abandoned girl at a bus stop in the winter, but she was the daughter of a billionaire, and upon discovering this, she does something that shocked everyone. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed down with fury on the icy asphalt, turning the city streets into a maze of puddles and distorted reflections. The 30-year-old single mother adjusted the collar of her worn coat and quickened her pace, fighting against the wind that cut her skin like invisible razors. Her 4-year-old son slept in her arms, heavy and warm, oblivious to the storm raging around them. She had just finished her third job of the day, cleaning offices late into the night, when her muscles no longer responded to the commands of her exhausted mind. The money barely covered the rent of the small apartment and feeding her son, who grew every day asking for things she couldn't afford. Life had become a constant race against time and need, where every penny was calculated and every decision weighed like a stone in her chest. The bus stop appeared as a refuge in the darkness of the night, and she hurried towards the small glass shelter, seeking protection from the relentless storm. It was then that she saw her, a tiny girl, appearing no more than 2 years old, huddled in the corner of the stop, shivering with cold, in a way that made the woman's heart break. The child wore clothes that, even in the darkness and wet from the rain, revealed their expensive origin. The wool coat had delicate trim, the shoes were genuine leather, and even the diaper peeking out under the little dress bore the brand of a well-known designer. But the little one was dirty, with dried tears on her face, and lips blue with cold, as if she had been abandoned there for hours. The single mother felt her stomach churn. She knew that feeling of helplessness, of being lost in the world, with no one to protect her. Without thinking twice, she approached the girl and knelt before her, trying not to frighten her more than she already was. "Hi, sweetie," she murmured in the sweetest voice she could muster, even with her heart pounding. "Where's your mommy?" The child raised large, dark eyes, full of a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. She tried to speak, but only strange sounds came from her mouth, as if the words had fled her mind, along with the security she should have known since birth. The bus arrived with the deafening noise of the engine mixed with the sound of the rain, but the woman didn't move. She looked around, searching for any adult who might be looking for the girl, but the street was deserted. Only she, her sleeping son, and that abandoned child existed in that moment, suspended in time. "I can't leave her here," she whispered to herself, knowing that this decision would change everything in her already complicated life. She could barely feed her own son. How could she take care of another child? But when she looked again at the girl's frightened face, she knew she had no choice. She took off her own scarf and wrapped the little one carefully, feeling how cold she was. The child didn't resist. She just snuggled against the woman's chest like an injured pup seeking warmth. In that instant, something broke and reorganized within the single mother's heart, creating space for another impossible love. The walk to her apartment was an agonizing journey. With every step, she wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she wasn't complicating an already precarious life even further. But when she got home and saw her son wake up and look with curiosity at the girl sleeping in her arms, she knew that some decisions transcend reason. During the first night, while the 2 children slept on the pull-out couch that served as her son's room, the woman stayed awake, watching the girl's peaceful breathing. There was something about her that didn't fit, something that went beyond the expensive clothes or the skin too soft for someone who should be living on the streets. The next morning, while preparing a simple oatmeal for the children, she noticed how the girl reacted to the sounds of the house. The noise of the kettle made her cower in fear, but the soft music from the old radio calmed her instantly. It was as if she had been raised in a controlled environment, where every sound had a specific meaning. Even stranger was the way the little one behaved around simple objects. When the woman offered her a plastic cup of milk, the child held it with a delicacy that suggested she was accustomed to more fragile materials. Her gestures had a refined education that contrasted with her age and current situation. The single mother's son, a smart and affectionate boy, immediately adopted the girl as a little sister. He shared his few toys with her and tried to make her smile with funny faces, creating a family dynamic that, despite being unlikely, worked naturally. But at night, when the children slept, the woman allowed herself to feel the real weight of her decision. Her budget, already tight, now needed to stretch to cover one more mouth. She would have to work even more hours, leaving the children alone for longer periods. Guilt and fear mixed with a growing tenderness for the girl who had arrived like a storm in her life, organized on the basis of survival. During the following days, she tried to find out where the child had come from. She asked the neighbors, checked if there was any missing person report at the local precinct, but nothing. It was as if the girl had materialized out of nowhere on that stormy night, bringing with her mysteries that the single mother didn't know if she wanted to unravel. The little one began to adapt to the simple routine of the house. She played with the boy, ate what was offered to her and slept peacefully, but always with a vigilance in her eyes that wasn't natural for her age. Sometimes the woman caught her looking out the window with an expectant expression, as if she knew someone would come looking for her. It was on one of those mornings, when the routine seemed to have found a fragile balance, that she noticed something that made her question everything again. The girl had woken up before the others and was sitting on the living room floor, organizing the boy's toys in a meticulous and sophisticated way, as if it were natural for her to have order and method in everything around her. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night, and the single mother's life had transformed into a delicate dance between need and growing love. The girl, whom she affectionately began to call Little One, had become part of the family in a way that defied any financial logic. But it was during her hours of work as a cleaner in the large commercial building downtown that reality hit with full force. On that Thursday morning, she pushed the cleaning cart through the polished corridors of the 15th floor, where the offices of important companies operated. Her movements were automatic after years of doing the same job, but her mind was at home, worried about the 2 children she had left in the care of the elderly neighbor. Little One had had nightmares the night before, waking up with heart-wrenching screams. She clung to the single mother as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had crumbled around her, and murmured disjointed words that sounded like fragments of a previous life that she could no longer fully reach. It was when she passed by the ajar door of the main meeting room that she heard the conversation that would change everything. 3 men in suits were arguing in serious and urgent tones, their voices laden with a tension that made the woman slow down her movements involuntarily. "It's been over a week since the boss's daughter disappeared," said a harsh voice. "He's going crazy. He hired private security teams, offered a fortune as a reward, but nothing. The girl simply vanished from the mansion as if she were smoke." The single mother's heart stopped for a moment. A missing girl, a mansion, a fortune offered as a reward. "The problem is that nobody knows how she got out of there," continued another man. "The security system didn't record anything. The cameras showed no suspicious movement. It's as if someone from the inside facilitated her exit. But who would do that to a 4-year-old? "He's suspecting everyone," added the third. He fired 2 security guards, interrogated the entire house staff. The housekeeper is hysterical, saying that the girl was in bed when she last checked, but in the morning the room was empty. The single mother felt her legs tremble. 4 years old, the age she had estimated for Little One. The description matched perfectly with the girl who was now sleeping in her house, who played with her son, who had found safety in her arms. "And how's he dealing with it?" asked the first voice. "Badly. Since his wife died 2 years ago, that girl is all he has. He was overprotective before, but now he's desperate. He cancelled all business trips. He's sleeping 2 hours a night. He's mobilized half the world to look for her. The woman leaned against the wall, trying to process what she had heard. A desperate father looking for his daughter. A rich, powerful man who had lost his wife and now was also losing his daughter. And she, a simple cleaner, had found this abandoned child at a bus stop. But something didn't make sense. If the girl had disappeared from a protected mansion, how had she ended up alone at a bus stop during a storm? Who had taken her there? And why had they abandoned her in such a cruel way? The rest of the workday passed like a confused blur. Her hands performed the mechanical tasks of cleaning and organizing, but her mind was in total turmoil. At every moment, the image of little one's face mixed with the words of the men in the meeting room, a desperate father, a fortune in reward, a child who perhaps had a family looking for her. When she got home in the late afternoon, she found the 2 children playing on the small couch, building towers with old wooden blocks. Little one smiled when she saw her, a smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks, and ran to hug her legs with the strength of someone who had found safety. That night, after the children fell asleep, the single mother remained sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea and facing the dilemma that had become impossible to ignore. If the girl really was the missing daughter of that man, she had a moral obligation to return her. But just thinking about separating from little one made her chest ache in an unbearable way. In the 3 weeks they had spent together, she had become more than a caregiver. She had become that child's mother in an instinctive and profound way. Little one looked for her when she was scared, slept better by her side, ate more eagerly when she was around. It was as if they had been made to meet on that stormy night, but there was also the practical matter that haunted her. Being accused of kidnapping or hiding a missing child could destroy her life completely. She could lose not only little one, but also her own son. She could go to prison, losing everything she had built with so much sacrifice. For 2 days, she carried this secret like a stone in her chest. She watched little one play and wondered if she was being selfish in keeping her. She saw her son become increasingly attached to the girl he considered his little sister, and questioned if she had the right to destroy this makeshift family that had formed. It was on a Saturday morning when she woke up and found little one standing at the window, looking at the street with that expectant expression that had become familiar, that she made the most difficult decision of her life. She couldn't continue living with that lie. She couldn't deprive a father of the right to find his daughter, even if it meant losing the child she had learned to love as her own. She put on her best clothes, which still seemed inadequate for what she was about to do, and left home with a determination that masked the terror in her heart. She had discovered the address of the company through discreet research at work, and now she was walking towards the most imposing building in the city, where the main office of the man looking for his daughter operated. The building was a structure of glass and steel that stood as a monument to power and wealth. In the main lobby, everything breathed luxury and sophistication. Polished marble, crystal chandeliers, impeccably dressed security guards. It was a completely different world from hers, a universe where people like her existed only as invisible shadows. At the front desk, an elegant woman with a professional smile greeted her with a courtesy that barely disguised curiosity about her presence there. When she asked to speak with the owner of the company about his missing daughter, the surrounding environment seemed to freeze for a moment. "One moment, please," said the receptionist, picking up the phone with quick and precise movements. Minutes later, a man in a suit appeared in the elevator, walking towards her with determined steps. He was tall, in his early 30s, and his appearance was exactly what she had imagined when she heard about him. Dark hair perfectly aligned, piercing eyes, and a presence that commanded immediate attention. But when their eyes met, something unexpected happened. For a moment she forgot why she was there, forgot the words she had rehearsed throughout the walk. He was incredibly handsome, with features that seemed to have been sculpted by an artist, but his eyes carried a deep pain that touched her in an unexpected way. "You have information about my daughter?" he asked, and his voice had a desperate urgency that made her heart clench. For a moment, she almost lost courage. She almost turned around and ran away, returning to her simple life with the 2 children she had learned to love. But then she thought of little ones standing at the window, waiting for something she might not even know what it was, and found the strength to speak. I have your daughter." The words came out of her mouth like a broken whisper, and she saw how the millionaire's face transformed instantly. Disbelief, hope, and fear mixed in his expression in a way that made her heart break. "What did you say?" he asked, taking a step forward, and she noticed how his hands trembled slightly. You know where she is?" "She's with me," replied the single mother, feeling tears burn her eyes. "I found her at a bus stop 3 weeks ago during that storm. She was alone, cold, and She couldn't finish the sentence because he grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes piercing hers with an intensity that left her breathless. For a moment, she thought he was going to yell, accuse her of kidnapping, call security. But what she saw in his face was pure relief, mixed with such deep pain that it made her understand that this man had gone through hell during the past few weeks. "Is she okay? Is she hurt? Please tell me she's okay." The words poured out of his mouth in a desperate torrent, and the single mother realized that behind all that wealth and power there was a father broken with fear. "She's okay," she assured quickly, seeing him take a deep breath for the first time since he had appeared. "She's safe, being taken care of. But she was very scared when I found her." She couldn't speak properly. She seemed to be in shock. The millionaire released her shoulders and ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. Then he looked at her with a suspicion that hadn't been present before, as if only at that moment he began to question why a stranger had appeared with news of his daughter. "Why did it take you 3 weeks to look for me?" he asked, and his voice now carried a coldness that made her feel small. "If you found her, why didn't you bring her to me immediately? Why didn't you call the police?" The question she had feared had finally arrived, and she found herself trying to explain feelings that she herself didn't fully understand. How could she tell him that she had fallen in love with the girl? How could she explain that she had created a family with that child who didn't even know she belonged to someone else? "I didn't know who she was," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "She couldn't talk. She didn't have any identification. I looked, I asked the neighbors, I went to the precinct, but nobody knew anything. It was only yesterday that I found out." "How did you find out?" he interrupted, and now there was something dangerous in his voice. "I work here in the building," she admitted, feeling her face burn with shame. "I'm a cleaner. Yesterday I overheard a conversation about her disappearance and realized it could be the same child." She saw him observe her then, really see her for the first time. He noticed her simple clothes, her calloused hands, the way she shrank under his scrutiny. And at that moment, the distrust in his eyes intensified in a way that made her want to disappear. "You're a cleaner in this building, and you show up here 3 weeks later saying you have my daughter," he said slowly, as if he were putting together a puzzle in his mind. "And now, what do you want? The reward? How much do you want to give her back?" His words hit her like a slap in the face. The implicit accusation, the way he looked at her as if she were a criminal, made something break inside her. For a moment she almost screamed at him, almost said that she had loved and cared for his daughter better than any expensive nanny could have done. "I don't want your money," she replied with a dignity that surprised her. "I came here because it's the right thing to do, because she needs to be with her father." Something in the way she said that seemed to touch him because the hardness in his eyes diminished slightly. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher if she was lying or telling the truth. "Where is she now?" he asked finally. "At home with me," she replied. "With my son." "You have a son?" The genuine surprise in his voice caught her off guard. "I do. He's 4 years old, almost the same age as her. They've become close." For some reason, this information seemed to relax something within him. Perhaps the idea that there was another child involved made the situation less threatening in his mind. "I need to see her," he said, and it wasn't a request. Now, the ride to her small apartment was a surreal journey. He insisted on going in his own car, a luxurious vehicle that contrasted grotesquely with the simple streets of her neighborhood. Throughout the journey, he asked questions about his daughter, how she was eating, if she had talked about what happened, if she showed signs of trauma. The single mother responded with the honesty she could, telling about the nightmares, about how the girl reacted to certain sounds, about the way she had gradually begun to open up. But as she spoke, she noticed how he became increasingly tense, as if every detail was a confirmation that something terrible had happened to his daughter. When they arrived at the small building where she lived, she saw him observe the place with an expression that mixed shock and something that might have been disdain. It was a stark contrast to the world he came from, and she felt embarrassed by the simplicity of her life. "This is it," she said, opening the door to the small but clean apartment. The sound of the door made the two children look in their direction, and the world seemed to stop for a moment. The billionaire's daughter was sitting on the floor, playing with wooden blocks alongside the boy, and when she saw her father, her reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of running to him with joy, she cowered behind the boy, her large eyes filling with fear. It wasn't the fear of someone who didn't recognize the person in front of her, but something more complex, as if his presence awakened memories she had tried to forget. "Sweetie," the single mother called softly, kneeling beside her. "This is your daddy. He's come to get you." The girl looked between the two adults, clearly confused and scared. Then, to everyone's surprise, she clung to the single mother's leg as if it were a lifeline, hiding her face against her skirt. The billionaire remained standing at the door, his face a mask of pain and confusion. It was obvious that he had expected a different reunion, a daughter who would run into his arms with relief. Instead, he faced a child who seemed afraid to go home. She doesn't usually react like this to strangers," the single mother said, trying to smooth things over even though she knew he wasn't a stranger to the girl. "I'm not a stranger," he replied, and there was a bitterness in his voice that made her regret the words. "I'm her father." Slowly he approached and knelt on the floor, getting down to his daughter's level. His voice became incredibly gentle when he spoke. "Hi, my princess. Daddy missed you so much. Are you okay?" The girl peeked out from behind the single mother's leg, and for the first time since he had arrived, her eyes showed a flash of recognition. But still, she didn't move towards him. It was at that moment that the single mother's son, who had observed the whole scene in silence, approached the girl and held her small hand. "You don't have to be scared," he said with the seriousness of an older child. "He seems nice." Something in that simple gesture broke the tension in the air. The girl looked at the boy, then at her father, and finally took a hesitant step in his direction. When he hugged her, she didn't resist, but she also didn't reciprocate with the intensity he had hoped for. During the next hour, the single mother watched father and daughter try to reconnect, and her heart broke with every moment. It was obvious that he loved her deeply, but it was also clear that something had changed in the child. She was no longer the same girl who had left home 3 weeks ago. As the afternoon progressed, the girl began to relax in her father's presence, but always returned to the single mother's side when she felt insecure. It was as if she had found in a stranger the security she had lost in her own world. The billionaire watched these interactions with an increasingly somber expression, and the single mother could see the questions forming in his mind. How could a child become so quickly attached to a stranger? What had happened in his house that made his daughter run away? And more importantly, who was responsible for her being abandoned in such a cruel way? When it finally came time for them to leave, the farewell was more painful than the single mother had imagined. The girl clung to her, crying, asking to stay a little longer. Her own son cried too, not understanding why his new little sister had to leave. "Can she come back to play?" asked the boy, and the innocent question created an awkward silence between the adults. The billionaire looked at the single mother for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that she couldn't completely decipher. Gratitude, perhaps, or confusion, or something more dangerous that she didn't want to name. "We'll see," was all he said. But when their eyes met again, she felt something electric pass between them, something that had nothing to do with the children's situation and everything to do with the way he had looked at her when he thought she was trying to blackmail him. After they left, the apartment seemed strangely empty and quiet. Her son asked several times when the girl would return, and she didn't know what to answer. The truth was that she probably would never see her again, and that reality hit her with a devastating force. But a few hours later, when she had already put her son to sleep and was washing the dishes from dinner, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she found the billionaire standing there alone, with a tormented expression that made her forget to breathe for a moment. "She can't sleep," were the first words that came out of his mouth, and the vulnerability in his voice was so raw that the single mother felt her heart clench. "She keeps crying, asking for you. I don't understand what happened, but she doesn't want to be with me." The single mother watched him, standing there on the doorstep, this powerful man who commanded companies and fortunes, completely lost in front of a 4-year-old child. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that told the story of yet another sleepless night. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside so he could pass. "Let's talk." He hesitated for a moment, as if only at that instant he realized where he was and what he was doing. But then he entered, stopping in the middle of the small living room and looking around as if it were the first time he really saw the place where his daughter had found refuge. "Sorry to show up here so late," he murmured, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his internal turmoil. "I didn't know what else to do. She's inconsolable." The single mother made tea for the two of them, an automatic action that gave them both time to process the strangeness of that situation. There was the richest man in the city, sitting in her simple kitchen, defeated by a child who should have been his reason for living. "Tell me what happened when you got home," she asked, placing the cup in front of him and sitting down in the opposite chair. He took a deep breath before starting to speak, and as the words came out, she could visualize the painful scene that had unfolded in the mansion. The girl had refused to enter her own room, screaming when he tried to take her there. She had hidden behind the furniture when the housekeeper appeared, trembling in a way that didn't seem natural for a child in her own home. "It's like she's afraid to be there," he said, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "But it's her house. It's where she was born, where she grew up. How can she be afraid of her own home?" The single mother felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply wrong with that situation, something that went beyond a child traumatized by getting lost. The girl's reaction suggested that something terrible had happened in that house, something that had made her prefer the uncertainty of the streets to the safety of her own room. "What about the housekeeper?" she asked. "How did she react to seeing the girl back?" His expression became even darker. Strangely, she seemed almost disappointed. She said she was happy, of course, but there was something in her eyes, I can't explain it. They talked for hours, and as the night progressed, the single mother began to see beyond the facade of power and wealth of the billionaire. He talked about how he had lost his wife, about how he had become overprotective of his daughter, about the constant fear that something would happen to the only person left in his family. In return, she found herself talking about her own life, the daily struggle to survive, the loneliness of raising a child alone, the fears and insecurities that haunted her. It was surreal how two people from such different worlds could find such deep points of connection in the pain and love for their children. "Why did you take her home that night?" he asked suddenly, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "You can barely support your own son. Why did you take on that extra responsibility?" The question caught her off guard, and she was silent for a moment, trying to find words to explain an impulse that had been purely instinctive. "Because I know what it's like to be lost and scared," she replied finally. "And because sometimes in life you just know what's right to do, even if it doesn't make sense." Something in the way she said that touched something deep inside him. His eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, he looked at her not as a suspicious stranger but as the woman who had saved his daughter when he couldn't protect her. During the following weeks, a strange and unexpected routine was established. He came to visit them almost every day, bringing his daughter to spend a few hours in the apartment where she felt safe. It was the only way for the girl to stay calm, and gradually she began to accept dividing her time between the two homes. The single mother watched the interactions between father and daughter with a mixture of tenderness and concern. It was obvious that they loved each other, but there was an invisible barrier between them, as if the child couldn't completely trust in her safety when she was at the mansion. It was during one of those visits that the first major twist happened. The girl was playing on the floor when she knocked over a glass of water, and the sound of the glass shattering made her scream in terror in a way that was disproportionate to the accident. But it wasn't just the fright that caught the adult's attention. It was the words she shouted as she hid under the table. "The mean lady will come back. She said I was bad. She said Daddy didn't like me anymore." The billionaire was paralyzed for a moment, and then he knelt beside the table, trying to reach his daughter. "What mean lady, my princess? What are you talking about?" But the girl had returned to the catatonic state that the single mother recognized from the early days, refusing to talk further about the subject. It was only later, when she put her to bed, that she managed to extract more details from the child. The truth that emerged was shocking. The housekeeper, who had taken care of the girl since she was a baby, had developed an unhealthy obsession with her boss. She believed that if she could get rid of the child, she could take the place of the deceased wife. For months, she had psychologically tormented the girl, saying that she was a burden, that her father would be happier without her. On the night of the disappearance, the housekeeper had drugged the child's milk with a mild sedative, taken her to a distant bus stop, and abandoned her there, hoping she would never be found. The plan was to pretend that the girl had run away, console the boss in his despair, and gradually become indispensable to him. When the single mother told all this to the billionaire, she saw his face transform into a mask of fury that frightened her. His hands trembled with rage, and for a moment she feared for the housekeeper's safety when he discovered the truth. "She trusted that woman," he said, in a voice that came out between clenched teeth. "I trusted her. And she tortured my daughter." The housekeeper was confronted and fired immediately, but the damage was already done. The girl had lost confidence in her own home, and even with the evil woman gone, she still associated the mansion with fear and rejection. It was then that the second twist shook their lives in a completely different way. During one of the investigations into the housekeeper's past, a connection was discovered that no one expected. Years ago, when the single mother was still married, her husband had worked at the billionaire's company and had been unfairly fired for a false accusation of theft. The discovery came through old documents that the billionaire found while reviewing the files of dismissed employees, looking for any pattern of suspicious behavior that might have gone unnoticed. When he saw the name of the single mother's deceased husband, a vague memory began to form in his mind. He remembered the case, An employee accused of stealing money from the cash register, dismissed summarily without a proper investigation. At the time, he had relied on the report from his security team and had not questioned the decision. Only now, years later, did he discover that the man was innocent and that the real culprit had been someone else who had managed to cover up her actions. When he appeared at her apartment door that night, carrying a folder with documents, the single mother knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. His expression was that of someone who had discovered something he would rather not know. "We need to talk," he said, and the formal tone in his voice made her recoil instinctively. The revelation was devastating. Discovering that the man she had developed deep feelings for was the same one who had destroyed her previous life was like taking a punch to the stomach. All the financial struggles, all the loneliness, all the suffering that she and her son had gone through could be traced back to that unfair dismissal. "Did you know?" she asked, in a voice that barely came out of her throat. "When you saw me for the first time, did you know who I was?" "No," he replied, and there was desperate sincerity in his voice. "I swear I didn't know. If I had known—" "If you had known what?" she interrupted him, the pain turning into anger. "Would you have offered me money? Would you have tried to buy me like you try to buy everything in your life?" The argument that followed was painful and revealing. All her insecurities about the class difference between them came to the surface, mixed with the pain of discovering that the man she had learned to love was responsible for years of suffering. He tried to explain, tried to apologize, offered financial compensation, but all of that only made the situation worse. For her, the offer of money confirmed all her suspicions that he saw her as someone inferior, someone whose problems could be solved with checks and wire transfers. "I don't want your money," she shouted, tears running down her face. "I wanted you to understand that some things can't be bought, that some wounds can't be healed with your fortune." From that moment on, the relationship between them became tense and complicated. He still brought his daughter to visit them because the girl needed that stability. But the intimacy that had begun to develop between the adults was replaced by a painful coldness. For months, they danced around feelings they couldn't express, united by the needs of the children, but separated by wounds that seemed impossible to heal. The girl, in her innocence, didn't understand why the two adults she loved couldn't talk anymore without there being tension in the air. It was then that the third and biggest twist happened, changing everything again. The press found out about the story of the missing girl and the cleaner who had found her, but the version that reached the newspapers was completely distorted. According to the reports, the single mother had kidnapped the child and held her hostage for weeks, demanding a fortune in ransom. The billionaire's wealthy family, who had never approved of his obsession with his daughter and saw the child as an obstacle to controlling their inheritance, took the opportunity to force him to distance himself from the single mother. They planted false evidence, bribed witnesses, and orchestrated a smear campaign that transformed the woman who had saved the girl into a criminal in the eyes of the public. The pressure was so great that he, advised by his lawyers and pressured by his family, began to believe that perhaps the press's version had some basis in fact. Perhaps she really had financial motivations. Perhaps it had all been an elaborate plan to extort money from him. The final break happened when he appeared at her apartment, accompanied by lawyers and social workers, questioning her ability to care for the children and suggesting that she had manipulated the situation from the beginning. The pain in his eyes when he accused her was so deep that she knew something had died between them at that moment. Months passed in a silent legal battle. He obtained an order for her to stay away from his daughter, and the girl, who didn't understand why she could no longer see the woman she considered a second mother, entered a deep depression that no therapist could cure. It was during this dark period that the single mother, even while being attacked publicly and facing legal threats, decided to investigate on her own. She knew that there was something more behind that whole situation, something that went beyond simple media manipulation. Working night shifts at the commercial building, she began to review discarded documents, to listen to conversations, and to put together pieces of a puzzle that would reveal the most shocking truth of all. The billionaire's family wasn't just trying to keep her away from the girl, they were trying to get rid of the child permanently. The discovery of the documents proving the family conspiracy happened by chance, when she found discarded papers that detailed a plan to declare the girl mentally unstable and institutionalize her in a private institution abroad. With the child out of the way, they would have total control over the inheritance and the family businesses. The housekeeper had only been a piece in the larger game, manipulated by promises of money and social position if she managed to make the girl disappear. When the original plan failed, they changed their strategy, using the situation with the single mother to justify the removal of the child from social life. Armed with this evidence, she made the bravest decision of her life. Even knowing that she could face serious legal consequences, she decided to expose the whole truth, no matter what it cost her personally. The public revelation of the family conspiracy was devastating for everyone involved. The billionaire discovered that the people he trusted most had tried to destroy the only thing that really mattered to him. The single mother was acquitted of all charges, but the process had left deep scars on her soul. In the end, when the whole truth came out and the real culprits were exposed, he understood that he had wrongly judged the only person who had loved his daughter without any financial interest. And she understood that behind all that wealth and power, there was a broken man who had only tried to protect what was left of his family, even if in a mistaken way. The final reconciliation happened when he publicly renounced the assets controlled by the manipulative family, choosing a simpler life alongside the woman who had saved his daughter and taught him the true meaning of family. Together, they created a new home where love was more valuable than any fortune, and where two children could finally grow up safe, surrounded by people who loved them unconditionally. True love had overcome all social differences, all manipulations, and all obstacles, proving that sometimes the most important people enter our lives in the most unexpected moments, turning tragedies into miracles and loneliness into family. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.